Simpleton podcast, the most popular podcast in eternity. Good to see you, Laura Heeman.
Hey, Clark.
Laura coming from Hyattsville, Maryland, and me coming from my woodshop in Kansas City. All right, we have a big show for you today. Let's first talk about our last show, or 2 shows ago now, the Roe v. Wade podcast. That, for us, went viral. We talked about signs of Catholic persecution, Roe v. Wade. It was gaining hundreds of views in a few hours.
In a few hours? In a few days? In a few hours? It went viral. Yeah.
Well, I noticed that between like 12 o'clock and 5 o'clock, it had gotten a couple hundred views.
Okay.
One day.
Yeah.
The funny thing about it, though, is that it stopped at about 520 views and almost getting 0 views now, like not growing at all. So it looks like it kind of went viral and then somebody like downranked it or something like this, or a little bit squashed it. So
does that mean we got watched enough to bother YouTube?
We're going to bother. Our goal is to get canceled because then we'll be really popular. That's how it's like Obi-Wan Kenobi. You kill me and I shall be stronger, right? So just keep an eye on that. That kind of increases the importance that if you like the podcast, if you're one of the saints in eternity who likes our podcast, you should share it with your people. All right. Are we ready to signpost this episode?
Go for it.
We just had the Simple House revival. I want to talk about Flannery O'Connor and Dostoevsky and my new baby who has the name of Flannery. And we want to talk about this Catholic moment in our culture. This is where we get deep. We're going to do, Tim Dillon was on the Joe Rogan podcast talking about the popularity of Catholicism. The New York Times said Catholicism is the hottest nightclub in New York City. We've got Shia LaBeouf talking to Bishop Barron. A lot of people taking a lot of interest in that podcast. And then we have people posing with their firearms and wrapping them in rosaries, and the Atlantic article saying the rosary is an extremist item. All of this to be covered about the possible Catholic moment in pop culture right now.
Let's go. Let's get into it. Yeah.
Okay. All right. We just had the Simple House revival. Revival is a term we use for our August gathering where we get the whole community together. We bring all the new missionaries in, and it's also a training. So it's like a time where, the DC and KC community bond and we train. And our training is different than most evangelization institutes. I think it's got a very different point and flavor to it. Mm-hmm. We are trying to be kind of the anti-apologist way of doing missionary work and the anti-proselytizing way of doing missionary work. We're trying to be like truly evangelical, like truly give people gospel. You're not defending anything. You're trying to wake them up to something, Yeah. And with that, we do theology in our training, but the goal is not theology. The goal is to have always relationship with God, Yeah. And the thing with theology is when your faith is kind of in a theological formation and centered there will come the person who's smarter than you, who has the argument that is better than yours, that you won't be able to see an error in, Yeah. And at that moment, do you lose faith? Do you doubt? Or do you be like, oh, I don't know the answer, but your faith is intact?
Yeah.
So we're trying to get people to that point in their faith. And this is a point we all need to get to because we're all going to end up having dementia. We're all going to end up having Alzheimer's. We're all going to end up fading intellectually. And our faith needs to be as rock solid then as it is now. Right. Yeah.
I think part of the training that's important is like knowing even what is the good news in your life? How is the good news active in your life? And I think there's a lot of intellectual people that can't answer that most, like very basic question.
And say it in a relatable way that makes you more human. That's not just like academic, right? Mm-hmm. And you also want to do it where, like, why do you know God's love? Do you know God's love because of a theological proof, or do you know God's love the same way you know your mother's love?
Yeah.
You could argue about your mother's love. You could do things like this, or a parent's love in general, but like you kind of know it because of experience.
Yeah.
So we're trying to get faith at that level. And in my mind, this is what the new evangelization was. It's interesting because, Laura, you and I are now so old that we say things like new evangelization and the young people have never heard the term.
Yeah, right. And that was like,
now.
ooh, what's this new thing? The new evangelization for us. Yeah.
Right. Well, it's no longer a new thing. It's now the retro thing.
No, that's what I mean yes. When we were kind of thinking in the early days of the ministry, it was like, oh, we've landed on this new thing, the new evangelization, and I think it is interesting because it felt really important. And I think the way it was interpreted was mostly underwhelming.
Right. Well,
yeah.
I think it's not been understood properly. Like, so John Paul II started using the term, the new evangelization, and then Pope Benedict kind of unpacked the term. And I think the unfortunate thing is when people heard new evangelization, they came to two conclusions. They came to this idea that new evangelization is all this new technology being used in the service of evangelization. It's not that, right?
Yeah.
And then the other thing they thought was there was kind of this youth movement, as there even is today, this JP2 generation, World Youth Day, things like this, that the new evangelization is actually the youth, is actually this new energy we're putting in. Yeah. It's not that either.
Yeah.
The new evangelization, according to Benedict, and I think this is exactly what JP2 intentioned, is this like rethinking of the way that we're spreading the truth towards not a defensive stance, not a counter stance to anything, but a truly like, I wanted to use the word progressive, but progressive means so many bad things right now. Like it's like truly like gospel way of moving people forward, Yeah. I think symbolized by JP2's theology of the body. And what I mean by that is like we went from like a sexual ethic that was like, don't do this, it's really bad if you do this, to saying, here's the point, here's the goal, here's why, here's what's better, Yeah. And that's the way we need to, I believe that is the evangelization of the first centuries.
Yeah, I think another key component was like that the people that we're going to evangelize effectively are people that are in living, loving relationship with God, right? It wasn't like about, you want right teaching, obviously, but it wasn't about like the best program or the right teaching or whatever, but that like it was like almost like the catechists need renewal as well,
The right teaching serves relationship with God. It's not the other way around,
Right.
And it's not right teaching's not the goal. It's the thing that helps us, on our way. And there's people who are too dumb to get all that right teaching who have an incredible relationship with God.
Yeah. I just always like to tease our friends in religious life that I'm like, you guys are hiring a porter, but there's all these like porter saints in your order,
Right.
Yeah. Who were too simple or too academically untalented.
And Pope Benedict said that the new evangelization is the classic evangelization. So the classic evangelization is what was sometimes referred to as the great evangelization, meaning like that evangelization of the first few centuries where Christianity is like taking over the ancient world. And that what's interesting about that is if you look at that book, The Irish Saved Civilization, the very first person to call themselves a missionary and take that as a job title is St. Patrick. So the great evangelization happened without missionaries.
Yeah.
That's a scandal to all of us who are trying to be missionaries.
Who are missionaries.
It's like an occupational hazard. It's right up there when Jesus says, you go across seas to make one convert and you make him twice the son of hell you are, right? These two verses or these two ideas have to be dealt with by every missionary or you're in grave danger, Yeah. So that's what we're doing in our revival. The other thing is we have a different outlook on evangelization than the most popular one right now. The most popular outlook right now, I think, is a discipleship model where you're taking people who are more progressed on the way and they're kind of teaching the group that's like behind them, And I don't really have a problem with that model. It's just not our model. Our model is an accompaniment model. And what that would mean is that like you're going and you're relating with this, like we're often sending like a 22-year-old to go meet a 55-year-old black grandma in the hood, right? And the idea that the 22-year-old is going to disciple this black grandma is kind of dumb,
Yep.
And what you end up with is this friendship where the 22-year-old does have something to offer to the extent they've prayed, to the extent that they know God, to the extent they can share something useful. They're evangelizing and giving truth in that relationship. But also this grandmother is giving a tremendous amount of truth and teaching to the other person, and they're kind of walking together towards God, right?
Yeah.
I think we should, I thought that the way Bishop Barron interviewed Shia LaBeouf, I thought was a pretty good example of that. Like, here's a guy who studied theology his whole life, has every degree you could possibly have.
And like, not just studied theology his whole life, is incredibly talented in it too.
Right. Might be one of the greatest, theologians alive today. Almost certainly is. Right. But he's letting, Shia make points and say what he really thinks. And just kind of listening and accepting it all. It's not clearly a discipleship relationship. It's much more, there's a great distance between these two characters, but it's definitely an accompaniment type of conversation they're having.
Accompaniment, I think that is like the newer model. I think it gets a bad rap around here a little bit, but yeah, that is our model. It's a good model. I also like the phrase we've used for a long time, friendship evangelization. And that gives, again, there's not sort of the hierarchy of discipleship,
So we do want to kind of spend more time on these topics sometime in a podcast, talk about some of the main themes from our revival. But for now, that's what revival is. The other thing revival is like this bonding thing. And what we found is dumb things happen at revival. Okay. If you get 20-somethings, single 20-somethings in a room, it's like they're in a competition and they won't admit it. It's like they need to find out who's the most athletic, who's the most pious, who knows the most about Catholicism, right? And so you're having these immature, little jousting contests when you get a group of 20-somethings together. So we've been thinking about this for years because it's been bothering me how I see behaviors that are just not worthy of, the situation, right? And no one can admit it. Every once in a while somebody be like, well, that event sucked. And I'll be like, yeah, tell me why. And they'll tell me something. And I'm like, yeah, I know what you're talking about, But most of the time, no one really admits to themselves that's what they're doing, right?
Yeah.
What we decided last year at Revival is that we need to start hazing people. Not really, but we need them to have this shared suffering
event. Competition. Let's put everyone down,
Right, yeah. We're just going to make you all suffer
humiliate
together.
Everybody.
Yeah. And then through this group humiliation and suffering, you will be bound together and you'll quit caring about all these more superficial things. So we invented something this summer, pure stroke of genius. It's called
Whose stroke of genius was it, Clark?
Most popular podcast in eternity had the true stroke of genius to create Pac-Man IRL. Do you know what IRL stands for, Laura?
Yes, Clark.
Are you young enough to know what IRL stands for, Laura?
Are you, Clark?
Of course. I am the hip 46-year-old podcast host.
Oh, my gosh.
In real life. Okay, so what we did was we dressed all the new missionaries and Claire, who's on her second year, up in Inky, Blinky, Clyde, Sue, Pinky costumes. So they're ghosts with big eyeballs on the front and their name on the back, right? All different colors. We got an old missionary to come back as ghost headquarters supervisor, Amanda Pence. People might know her because she visits a lot of our donors and kind of keeps people up to date on the ministry. And then we had all the old heads, Chelsea, I, and Margot, dressed in Pac-Man costumes. And we went downtown on a grid that was about half a mile by half a mile and played Pac-Man in real life. So we'd release a Pac-Man, and every 2 minutes a ghost gets released, and they're running to try to locate Pac-Man, communicate on their walkie-talkies, and bring the rest of the ghost gang in to corner Pac-Man. Right? Unfortunately, Pac-Man lost. There were no power pellets. It was unfair.
Yeah.
A lot of unsportsmanlike. No, it was great. Everyone was completely gassed by the end. We kept introducing new Pac-Man. We let
was there
Nash.
Running, or was this walking Pac-Man? What?
I was the first Pac-Man. I made it we needed to run about 14 miles or 12 miles with very little overlap to clear the board. And so minimal overlap would be about a 12-mile run, right? And we had 3 Pac-Man lives. Yeah. So each Pac-Man would probably need to run 4 miles-ish to win, and that would be assuming you didn't have to backtrack a lot, right? So I only made it like 1.5 miles running. I ran basically the whole way, and then I got run down. But what was happening was we saved Margot for the end, and she's kind of the best runner out of us.
Yeah.
And the ghosts were slowing down. Like Chelsea and I wore them out. And so Margot made more than a couple miles,
Yeah.
And then we just started letting other people be Pac-Man just because we hadn't sufficiently hazed the ghost. I started calling myself the dungeon master, like the guy who can like change rules in the game while you're playing the game,
Yeah.
So I'd get on the walkie-talkie and tell them the new rule, to make it harder. So we're going to have some photos of that. I think they went out on social media, but they're also going to be in the next newsletter, which you should be receiving very soon. Well, that's that segment. Shall we go on to Flannery O'Connor and Fyodor Dostoevsky?
Yeah.
All right. My wife and I just had a baby, very beautiful little girl, and we knew it was a girl. And I was really, working hard to name this girl Flannery. Whenever I would mention this to people, I visibly saw people wince at this name. And I love my wife so much, and my wife allowed this name to get through. It's a middle name, not a first name. But the reason why I wanted this name was I think that Flannery, O'Connor, and Dostoevsky are kind of birds of a feather in a way. And they have all these heroes that are deeply flawed and deeply great. They have sins that are very notable, and they also have supernatural gifts.
Mm-hmm.
Right? This feels very biblical when you look at biblical characters, but it's something that very much challenges our own mentality, right? Dostoevsky will have a whole scene where the whole point of the scene is that this prostitute prays deeply and beautifully and maybe better than anyone else in the whole town, you know? But in this kind of like pharisaical moment that I think the church is always tempted to, but maybe right now it's tempted more than ever, there's this sense of like, no, right? Like I rejected Flannery O'Connor for a long time, and I only trust people if they kind of like say, oh, I love Flannery O'Connor, and they look mischievous, or if they say, I hate Flannery O'Connor. If anyone says, oh, yes, Flannery O'Connor and Dostoevsky, great authors, blah, 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 of the Catholic tradition. I'm like, you don't even know these people. Like, you don't.
Right.
Like one of my friend's wives, she was like, I hate Flannery O'Connor. And I was like, I love that you said that.
Yeah. We had a Flannery hater in one of our book clubs, and it was great, and necessary.
I am a converted Flannery hater. So the thing that made me hate her was she wrote the book, The Violent Shall Bear It Away.
The Violent Bear It Away. Yeah.
The Violent Bear It Away. Okay. The book is about this guy who is a prophet, appears to be a real supernatural prophet. He's like in the deep South or something. And he's obsessed with baptizing this kid who's got a disability like Down syndrome. It's not even his kid. And at some point in the book, he baptizes this kid and drowns this kid and murders him while he's baptizing him. Right? Yeah. And starts a forest fire by the end. That's horror. So the whole book is a horror, and that's what Flannery O'Connor is. She's kind of a horror author. But I thought this is horrible because it doesn't make sense that this man is a prophet because he's not virtuous. Like, why is he getting all these supernatural gifts?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Right. Yeah. Like the normal logic is that you act virtuously, you piously apply yourself to certain things, including prayer, and then you get spiritual reward. Right.
Yeah.
So it doesn't look like the way God works. Right. Except in the Bible, this happens. We can talk about Balaam's ass. This guy's literally a prophet of an idol, but he's also a prophet of the true God. Right.
Yeah.
There's just all these, and David is the man after God's own heart, but he's a seriously flawed character also.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So this appears to be what God is, in a sense, I would say, I believe it appears to be what God's after, but it's also, there's no teaching in the Catholic Church about fairness.
Yeah.
Fairness is some weird secular thing almost, right? God's not fair. He never claimed to be fair.
Yeah.
that's a pretty hard truth, right? But it's also pretty cool. You don't want God to be fair, because if you have to pay for all your sins in a fair way, you're going to be in trouble.
Yeah, right. I mean, yeah, and this comes up in multiple ways in the gospel that are disturbing, you know?
Right. So I named my daughter Flannery because I wanted her to kind of be a badass who kind of took on this, you know? I wanted her to be a toughie. I told my friends that I wanted to name her Cruise Missile, but Audrey wouldn't let me, so we named her Flannery. I also wanted to call her Holy Terror, but I feel like Holy Terror translated into a name is Flannery. But there's also this idea of like perspective, right? Like if I am like a middle of the road guy, maybe I bench pressed 100 pounds or something like that. Not even sure what my bench press is, right? And then there could be an incredibly strong man, right, standing next to me. And it's kind of obvious to all of us who's the strong guy and who's not the strong guy. But like from God's 20,000 foot view, you know, or 100,000 foot or eternal view, the guy who moves galaxies and cosmoses and shapes things and things like this, right?
Yeah.
He does not going to see a big difference in strength there. Yeah. Right. And in virtue, it's kind of the same way in a way. Like God is perfect. We're all so darn fall short of it that in a way, from that view, it's not so obvious what's going. It's not, you know, glaring the difference, you know, and that's kind of the humility of the saints is that they're focused on, you know, God, and they see the fall short, and they don't see themselves as that much greater than their neighbor because they're focused on God's point of view, not on our point of view of like, you're a nun, this is a prostitute, you know?
Yeah. I think, you know, like the phrase, this used to be popular years ago, but for the grace of God, there go I. Like, I don't feel like I hear that being articulated very much, you know, right. And I think it's one of the challenges of like our missionaries to sort of understand that when, you know, we're encountered with, you know, some of the dysfunction and, you know, issues.
Well, let's transition that to this pop culture idea, because I think that, you know, for a long time, I was hearing the word moral signaling to always be like about progressives.
Yeah.
You know, like they're virtue signaling. They're always like showing how great they are by doing these things and posting them on social media, right? Yeah. But like right now, we're in a moment of like kind of conservative virtue signaling. Like a woman who wears a long dress might look on a woman who wears a knee-high dress, or, you know, are you wearing, you know, the thing on your head during mass or not? Or are you like, there's a lot of rosaries going out on Instagram right now. And this goes into our cultural moment thing where we need to, let's talk about where we are in the culture and whether or not we're in an abusive relationship with pop culture. I think we are in an abusive relationship with pop culture, and that implies some things that we need to do to counteract that. Yeah. How about we start with Tim Dillon?
Tim Dillon.
All right. Tim Dillon. Tim Dillon is I would call him a gay conservative. He would hate to be called conservative, but he kind of is. He's kind of with a bunch of other gay conservatives like Douglas Murray, Glenn Greenwald, Dave Rubin, and some level Milo Yiannopoulos was one too. He's kind of fallen off. I don't know what happened to him. But they were kind of had this moment after Trump's election where they were speaking better sense on the conservative side.
Like they were the only people talking sense. Yeah.
Right. And it was weird. It was like, I felt like it almost had to do with their gayness that they were able to do it. It was like they had already been socially outcast because they're older gay men. They've already experienced social outcastness, that they had already kind of conquered the fear of it, you know? Yeah. So like, whereas like Republicans were kind of afraid to deal with the Trump thing for getting socially outcast, these guys were speaking, you know, very clearly and well, you know? Yeah. So Tim Dillon, a stand-up comedian, loves to say outrageous things. That's the point of his life, basically. That and to love God, which we have to catch him up with. But Long Islander native. He's on the Joe Rogan podcast. And Ben tried to clean it up for our audience. He took out some of the swear words.
It's just like a long string of beeps, though, but you'll get the point.
Okay. All right, let's play that.
It's like you could see he's saying the green grass is coming through the snow.
Yes, all the cool kids now are unwoke. Some of them are going back to Christianity because it's the only way to be rebellious. Because, you know, everybody's blue-haired, non-binary talking about And that's like, it's the cover of Newsweek. So you have to be like a Catholic Opus Dei, like saying the Rosary to be a problem now.
Yeah.
Like you used to be able to just dye your hair and get a tattoo and a nose ring. Now that's like, oh, what are you running for Congress? So now the other side of it is a lot of people are kind of going, there's elements of that are good, and there's elements of that are not great probably, but that's what young kids are doing now because they're like, this. They're like, they've realized that how empty this current world is that we've created spiritually for people, because it is empty.
It is empty.
It's just very empty. It's about money and profit, and everything has no history or tradition, or everything's so disorienting. Things happen so quickly that the pace of change is like making people go, what the and people need to situate themselves in the universe, and they don't know how to do it. And they're going, dude, I'm like, this rock is spinning and I don't know what's going on. And every day there's a new edict about what you can say, what's real and what's not. And people are going back to things that root them. And one of them is religion. And I think religion has a lot of positives. I mean, there's some negatives, but I think religion has positives for sure.
It's definitely a good moral scaffolding for a lot of people.
You need something to ground you, make you humble, make you realize that you are living for a finite amount of time on earth. You should treat people with respect. There's a code is good to have a moral code. I'm not saying what yours should be or not, but just the constant stuffing money down your throat, having tons of meaningless sex, constantly obsessing over material things. These are probably ultimately spiritually empty things.
Definitely.
Yeah.
All right, let's summarize what he just did, and then let's summarize these other signposts in this social moment. Mm-hmm. Tim is saying that the youngest people in our society, in order to be punk rock, are becoming Catholic, and they're not just becoming Catholic.
Yeah, they're like becoming like Opus Dei traditionalist Catholics, is what he says.
Right. They have to be radically Catholic. They can't be vanilla Catholic. They have to be like extremely Catholic, right?
Yeah.
Which part of our whole point is that extremely Catholic means extremely normal, extremely with God, extremely in relationship. It doesn't mean a lot of symbols, right?
Yeah.
All right. New York Times then publishes an article. I'll say the name of it, but I think Laura is the one who wants to summarize it. Yeah. The hottest nightclub in New York City is
Catholicism. I don't actually remember the title of the article, but
sorry. The title is the hottest nightclub in New York City is the Catholic Church.
The Catholic Church, yeah. Basically, there's like kind of a growing number of like long skirt wearing, MAGA hat wearing chatties in New York City. And there's like all these different kind of conservative trends, but the one that stands out the most is like the number of people taking up Catholicism. And this is like, I realized while reading this article that like the conversion of Brooklyn is like old, like the Brooklyn people, the hipsters, like they're old, right? So this is like a new group of people. There's like a thing that people seem to be attracted to, the like aesthetic, the artistic part of the church, and sort of the transgressive nature of the church. And they feel like it's kind of like a way to stick it to the man. More deeply, there's like a sense like it's like the sort of red pill idea that people feel like they were raised to like have good jobs and careers, and that's at odds with the deepest longing of their hearts, which might be a family, a husband, being a mom, wife, or other way around. But yeah, so the article kind of talks about this, and it talks about how maybe for some people it's kind of a pose, or it talks about maybe it's LARPing, but the
LARPing, for those old people who listen to our podcast, is live action role playing. It means like you're playing pretend. It's not coming from an authentic place.
Yeah. But I guess there was a sense in the article, and I think that there's some, right, I agree with this. It's like, if you LARP it well enough, it might become real, and that people feel like this is happening. But there's a sort of, this overlaps with the Tim Dillon's comments, like people want restraint and meaning in their lives. And it's like, there's nothing, offering that other than religion. And Tim Dillon had the exact same
point
observation. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And then we have Shia
Shia LaBeouf.
Shia LaBeouf. Okay.
Yeah.
Now, he gave a great, interview talk with Bishop Barron. It was released this month in August 2022. And a lot of people found that pretty cool, pretty moving,
I want to, I thought it was like mostly edifying, and it seems like he's had like real conversion, real prayer moments that have been really powerful.
I want to warn about this. I want to warn about this generally with everything we're talking about right now.
Yeah.
That I learned this through ministry. Like, we deal with a lot of mentally ill people, right? And with mentally ill people, they are fairly desperate. And when they talk to you, they could tell you that you are the best Christian they've ever met, that you have changed their life, that you are more meaningful to them than their parents or something, right? And then a week later, a day later, an hour later, they can cuss you out. They can tell you that you're not a real Christian, that you're on the grift and exploiting poverty. They could tell you anything they can to hurt you and tear you down, right? Some people, unfortunately, have like this in their parents, right? Like, this is not everyone's met someone like this, be it like a bad ex-boyfriend or ex-girlfriend or whatever. You've all met someone that mentally unstable, right? It's not rare, schizophrenics do it maybe at the most extreme, but a lot of people have this bad way of riding this roller coaster, right? And the thing is like, if I have a good friend, like Laura, you and I are friends, and we've known each other a long time, and I believe that you're mentally healthy, right? If you are disappointed in me or sad about me or tell something hard to me, I'm going to take it very seriously.
Yeah.
If you give me a compliment, I take it seriously too.
Yeah.
Right? But when you're dealing with someone who's not stable, you cannot take the insult seriously. You also cannot take the compliment seriously. If you take the compliment seriously, you will take the insult seriously. Like, if you have a bad relationship with a parent or a boyfriend or a girlfriend or whatever, and they're like buttering you up, you cannot allow yourself to get buttered up.
Yeah.
Or when they get negative, you have to actually distance yourself emotionally from that,
Yeah.
Because they don't behave logically emotionally. Therefore, it's not logical to engage them at that level, right? You can't ride the roller coaster up if you're not willing to ride it down, right?
Yeah.
And pop culture is like this a little bit. Like, we're going to get persecuted and we're going to get loved up.
Yeah.
I don't think you should try to feel a lot of satisfaction when it's like, oh, wow, Shia LaBeouf. Now he's...
I mean, I think we can rejoice, right, for like sinner, coming home. And I think we can know also he's likely going to fall again, like all of us sinners do, and I think we can be happy for him and pray for him. I also think it's like you take it with a grain of salt because he has a history of being like very unstable.
Right. And his history is kind of wild. Like, it's
pretty wild. Yeah.
Like, if you look up like plagiarism, if you look up the best part of his history is his feud with this anonymous group called 4chan. That's the most entertaining part of his history, but it's very unstable history, right? And even the stuff he's admitting he did wrong is not the complete amount of stuff he's done wrong, right?
Yeah.
And what we've also found in ministry is that when people convert and they have a decade plus of sin or problems, it takes like a decade to get it right. You don't expect an overnight or even a 1-year conversion. It's kind of, and there's also something where, like, in Alcoholics Anonymous, I've heard the old timers say that you never let someone with 1 year of sobriety speak.
Yeah.
Because they believe that they're lying.
Yeah.
Meaning like they're not yet based in reality enough to be teaching anybody anything.
They're enjoying, I think this is like a kind of dangerous, it's like you have a great sinner converts who's popular or whatever, and they get a lot of attention, and it's like that attention, it can sort of encourage something other than is not faith. Like, it can encourage this kind of false piety or something,
Yeah, well,
because you feel...
Yeah, whenever popularity or social acceptance is associated with greater faith, there's a danger there.
Yeah.
Because there's a danger that you've got mixed motives.
Yeah.
But so Shia LaBeouf, am I saying it right? I'm sorry.
Shia LaBeouf.
Shia LaBeouf. I said it right. Okay.
Yeah.
He's the new Britney Spears. So Britney Spears converted last summer. She's widely known to be incredibly unstable. We hope the best for her. It didn't create great waves when she converted, but it did make the newspaper, right?
Yeah.
This is a new situation like this in my mind, right? And at best, he's kind of a Flannery O'Connor Dostoevsky figure, like someone who's got serious flaws, but also serious insight. I think Mel Gibson could be thought of this way. He's got the passion of Christ. That Mel Gibson and Shia LaBeouf are also very good friends, according to that podcast. But like Mel Gibson's got the passion of Christ, and then after the passion of Christ, he's got this
crazy.
Just to research Mel Gibson phone call on Google, and you will have something that shakes you like he's demonically
totally
possessed,
abusive and insane. Yeah,
I don't even want to go over it. And we're not trying to judge. I think the most charitable way to judge it is they're like Dostoevsky characters, right?
Yeah.
And it just means don't get on a high with it, right?
Yeah, I think the thing I like about them is like I think Shia LaBeouf was like outcast everywhere, and the Catholic Church is like, we will take your dregs, society. And I love that. But I also think like we can't, there's a thing that we want to be like, ooh, is this celebrity Catholic? Ooh, is this celebrity Catholic? And it's like we want to prop ourselves up, or it's like confirmation bias, right? Like we want to feel good that like, oh, we're on the right side because look, this celebrity is Catholic or something. Or it's like a kind of way of showing that the Catholic Church is winning or something like that. And then something happens where the celebrity does something wrong, or maybe attends like a Pride March, which happened, and people are like upset.
There are some mature Catholic celebrities that still have problems, but then there's also people who are just clearly mentally unstable.
Yeah.
And that's kind of this case. But let's kind of go on from that to talk about this other thing that's happening, because I think we need to tie all these things together to try to explain what's happening right now. Somebody sent us an email, a friend of the podcast, showing tons and tons of Instagram photos of guns wrapped in rosaries. All right. This is a thing. All right. I have a sense, like, as someone who looks at it, I look at it and I was like immediately shocked. I don't think they're doing it for shock value.
Are these like Second Amendment people or like gangsters? Who are they?
Second Amendment people.
Okay.
Yeah.
There's like, if you think of like kind of LA gangs or whatever, or I don't know, like Hispanic gangs, the Rosary has been,
Yeah, like the drug cartels use a lot of Catholic religious stuff also. But that's not what this is. What this is
okay.
People trying to embrace masculinity and masculinity in their spirituality. And they see it as harmonious to say, I pray the Rosary as a weapon, and here's my other weapon,
Yeah.
And it's a little odd, to most people. And The Atlantic just published an article saying the Rosary has become a symbol of like the alt-right, or a symbol
like
of
an
extremism.
Extremist.
Right?
Yeah.
And that's that can be true and dumb at the same time.
Yeah.
Meaning like it could be that there are some people throwing it around like it's a symbol. They're morally signaling with it, but it's also dumb to say something that's 1,000, or 800 years old is not way deeper than some extremist symbol. So
I think The Atlantic has like no freaking clue how many people pray the Rosary, right?
Right.
Yeah.
They kind of know what the social media vibe is, but I do think they do know that. Yeah. That's where I think Tim Dillon is on it too. I don't think Tim Dillon really knows the heart of Catholicism, but I do think he knows what the vibe is.
Yeah. He did. I think he like comes from an Irish Catholic background, by the way. But yeah. Right. I think your statement still stands, but
yeah. So now let's talk about like, how do we like think of all this all together? I think that the part of the left that is usually labeled as the progressive part of the left kind of controls discourse a lot, right?
Yeah.
And it's at the same time showing itself to be very bankrupt and contradicting some even basic natural laws, right?
Yeah.
Like just like they never act like heterosexual marriage is actually a really good thing,
Yeah.
Or that family is in fact really important, not just for individuals and their happiness, but even for society,
Yeah.
Like there's just basic truths, even abortion is an example, that they don't seem to honor,
Yeah.
And the youth are kind of like discovering this, like the Gen Zs, right? And in discovering that, that's what they, I think, are calling a red pill moment. Like they're like, whoa, you know, I'm getting lied to constantly. It's like a conspiracy, dude, you know?
Yeah.
And then when you look around, you're like, what's the most radical way to be anti this? And it's like Catholicism, because we've been saying these things for, you know, longer than this empire has been around, longer than the last empire was around, longer than, you know, like for millennia, you know?
Yeah.
So in a way, Catholicism is getting a lot of credit and people are identifying with it, but that's kind of different than the core of conversion and evangelization, you know? And it's not wrong. Like Shia LaBeouf may, because of that podcast, force a couple thousand more people to enter a Catholic church, right? And a couple of those people might stick and really have deep conversions, right? And really grow the faith that way. And I think that's why Bishop Barron interviewed him partly to show us what evangelization is, because Shia LaBeouf talks about the friars he interacted with and how that worked. But he also did it to just like help the vibe a little bit and get more people into the church, you know?
Yeah.
So it's a net good, usually, I think. But for people who are more mature.
I want to just make a distinction, though, and I think this is kind of what you're getting at. Like, I think Shia LaBeouf, like, talks about, and I hope it is authentic, like kind of being welcomed into community and really experiencing moments in prayer in the Eucharist that were really moving and like giving himself over to God and letting go. Like, I think that's like the authentic thing, and you want more of that. And that's different from like maybe the vibe of this sort of red pill thing that you're like into the Catholic Church for the sort of political or...
I would agree. I also don't think that the way we just described that really describes anyone in a sense. Like we've kind of too trivialized what their conversion is. But there is this like background to it. You know what I mean?
Yeah. But I guess like I know that the New York Times article sort of visited the theme of posing and LARPing just because it's like a way to be transgressive, you know, and is it authentic or is it not authentic? And I don't want to examine anybody's, but I do think it's like it has to be right. Just always reminding, you know, having in mind it has to be more than the sort of like culture war winning idea or anything like that, right? And maybe there's some people that are kind of high on the culture war stuff or the transgressive thing, and they need to be brought into the deeper.
I think ultimately we're not in a culture war, meaning like there is a culture war happening, but we need to have a positive vision, and there is nothing stopping you right now from enacting that vision. The progressives aren't stopping you. The government's not stopping you. You are to enact your vision of the kingdom on earth right now, period.
Yeah.
Right. And it's a positive vision. It's not an anti-gay rights vision.
Yeah. And it's a vision that like promotes and is streaming from like being in relationship with God.
Right. So part of the reason why this new traditionalism is related to this is because it's seen as the most opposed, like the most radically different than the progressivism, right? And the mainstream church, I'm going to say, including myself, which I think the mainstream church is the church, has a fault. And it's a fault that I'm like trying to weed out of myself. And I think this fault is kind of like from I think it's as old as the 19th century, like the 1800s, where it's like if we had two people if in the Middle Ages a man walked in dressed as a knight with a sword and he said, I want to be a monk, but I want to be a knight too. They'd be like, sure, there's the Knights of Templar, there's the Hospitallers, there's probably even another order I can't even think of that you can go join, go be a knight and go be a monk at the same time, right? If a man right now comes in, looks like a special operations guy with his, AR-15 or whatever and says, I want to be a monk and I want to be a soldier too, we'd be like, dude, you are missing everything, right? Like there's just like no place for that guy, right?
Yeah.
And the truth is probably in between the Middle Ages and now. Like the reality of the way we should be is probably we don't need to bring the Knights of Templars back, but we need to like act like that guy can really be holy, really be a saint, and really be a soldier, right? Yeah. And there's this part of the masculinity that we've like taken away, and you see all these different groups trying to recreate masculinity, and it looks like LARPing. You know, like these groups that are going to train you how to be a man now. the art of
You're gonna
manliness.
smoke cigars and drink whiskey. Yeah.
Right. Or you get tactical, which is where you're like got all these different gadgets on you that are like the real men I've known in my life had grease on them, were dirty, were very strong, were very patient, were very protective, were kind of amazing guys, and they didn't do anything tactical.
Yeah.
You know, they didn't have any like the guy who carries a pocket knife to the office. It's like,
Yeah.
I want that guy to just admit he likes knives, not that try to convince me that
It's so useful at the office.
Exactly. Yeah.
You'll never know when you need it. Yeah.
Use it once every 2 weeks in a really great way, but is it worth carrying every day for that, or just to go to the drawer and get one out of the drawer? You know?
Yeah.
So there's this acknowledgement that we've lost masculinity in faith. And what I mean by that is like, we act like the pacifist is like a perfection of faith. Like someday if we were all good enough, we'd all be pacifists.
Yeah.
Or someday we'll all be vegans. Like it's just a matter of time before, because vegans, obviously, right, they're just kind of ahead of their time, you know? It's wrong. It's not right. It's not that Christians are meant to be pacifists, right? Just because the Desert Fathers or St. Francis was never going to like take up arms again because he took a religious vocation is not the same thing as pacifism, you know? Having, you know, your priest go into battle not carrying a gun, but just going there to serve the spiritual needs of the soldiers is not the same thing as saying that the higher holiness is pacifism.
Yeah.
You know? So there's a way in which we are not giving men models that are saintly and masculine. We're kind of acting like they need to become more effeminate, kind of like an English gentleman who would never defend himself. It's always turn the other cheek. And I noticed that like when I was single, this kind of worked for me. Like being a pacifist worked because like maybe I would defend a child who's getting abused if I walked in on it. But besides that, there wasn't like an obvious time I needed to be violent, you know?
Yeah.
But now that I'm a parent of 5 barbarians, but I also have to worry about my 5 barbarians getting hit, you know, being threatened by outside forces or whatever, right? I have a very different masculinity than I did when I was single.
Yeah.
You know? And I have to confront things, and I have to stop things, and I have to protect things, and I have to take precautions. And somehow I think we as a mainstream church have lost or are doing something unhealthy there. And this is why your brother started Estovir back in the day.
Well, he started it. He brought it to a school from CUA, but and I think
because they knew something was missing.
Well, and I think it also explains the popularity of Pier Giorgio Frassati, who I love, but like Ryan and I always make fun of, like, oh, you named another college group after Pier Giorgio Frassati, but
well, they're doing what I'm doing with Flannery. I'm saying Flannery's the message we need today, and they're saying Frassati is, right?
Yeah.
And that's kind of what the point of naming things is, you know?
No, I know. Yeah, but we need more of it because Frassati is like a guy that appeals to a certain group of people, you know?
Right.
And so we need more modern male saints.
Yeah. So where are we going with this? So the church does need to, I think that part of this was, I think this is why guys like, I hate calling these guys out, but like Gaffigan and who's the guy who does the Late Show who's Catholic?
Stephen Colbert.
Yeah. I think that they're part of something that I saw it in myself. They've too identified a certain type of liberalism with Catholicism. You know, like maybe they're pro-life and that's good, but they think that this whole like just, you know, more and more rights, more and more, you know, considerations for everyone is actually going to create the best society. And that's just never been the case. And we're getting to a really weird moment in our culture. We need to have a different podcast on this at some point where Christianity is like progressivism defines itself almost as like a 1960s rebellion against the man, right? But progressivism is the man.
It is the man today,
The only way to rebel is to be against progressivism, actually, right? Yeah. And Catholicism and Christianity in general is definitely not the man anymore, right? Like you're not punching up if you attack Christianity. You're punching down, right?
Yeah.
And usually we let people who are down punch up, right? So you're getting to a point where Christianity is going to start punching up, and that could be ugly and could be bad for Christianity too. But like you're also going to get that way with like the way they're framing the racial discourse. You're going to get white people who are proud of being white because they're getting punched, you know, and it's going to get bad. you know?
Yeah.
So anyway, we need to talk about that. We plan on doing a critical race theory episode in the future.
Mm-hmm.
So what else do you have to say, Laura? Should we round this one up?
Yeah, I think we should round this one up.
All right.
Great.
God bless. Please like, share, and give us feedback. Thank you for listening to the Simpleton podcast, the most popular podcast in eternity.
We saw the rankings. That's how we know.